right, welcome to the SynMax Podcast. I'm Eric Anderson, co-founder and chief technology officer at SynMax. I'm joined here by Gary D. Brown. He is an associate professor of practice at Texas A&M, a faculty lead for cyber policy at Bush School of Government and Public Service, as well as a retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force, and I just learned the first legal counsel at U.S. Cyber Command. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So Gary has a lot of depth of knowledge, not just around cybersecurity as well as defense intelligence and foreign policy issues. He also has a lot of expertise around AI. So I thought we would start there. Obviously, over this last weekend, there was kind of a pivotal moment in AI, or at least some people believe it was, with the release of the Chinese model DeepSeek. Just curious, what are your thoughts on DeepSeek? Is this a Sputnik moment for American AI companies?
Yeah, for sure. I guess it was definitely a Sputnik moment for the financial markets. Anyway, if nobody
Nvidia down 17%.
Yeah, not so great. But I think I'll reserve judgment until we know more. I think the early reviews obviously are really good for the model, and we'll see how that shakes out. I think it's possible we'll learn more about how it was actually developed down the road. But I would say it can't be entirely surprising that China's developing a capable AI model using some other path than the one that we're using in the West. It has to be seen as a normal response to trying to figure out how to navigate this new world where they don't have access to the latest chip technology. So we'd expect them to look for other ways to compete. And I think if it's a better way, I think we'll do it that way as well. And that's okay too. This is the way the system works. We compete with each other and the winner wins at the end. And I think ultimately the West is better at competing on the playing field than the Chinese are.
That's very helpful. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the fact that the Chinese have kind of had to come up with their own way deliberately, right? Because AI regulation, I believe it was signed in 2022. We're not allowed to, NVIDIA's latest chips became export controlled. What was shipped to China was a lot less capable than what's available in the US. So they were working within the constraints of the system, and that perhaps spurred creativity for them to make this breakthrough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And I will add, since we announced the limitation of chip exports to China, every time I had professional meetings with colleagues from China, they made a point whenever they spoke of telling us from the United States how it didn't matter, how unimportant it was that they weren't going to have access to the chips, which of course made me think it's incredibly important that they don't have access to the latest chip. So I think it really was, it seems to me to have been an effective strategy. And the fact that they found a workaround, is to be expected.
Interesting. So I'm actually going to jump ahead because, we're talking about the concept of AI regulation. I think this is really relevant. This is a case where you could argue that AI regulation kind of backfired and spurred a bit of creativity in our adversaries. Maybe in the end, it'll be for our mutual benefit because of the development of a new technology. But, there's been a lot of AI regulation, particularly in Europe, and there's been talk of AI regulation in the previous administration in the US, although I think those ideas are now kind of deceased. In Europe, they passed the EU AI Act of 2024, which put a lot of onerous restrictions on AI companies. So my question for you is, are these AI regulations necessary, and are they perhaps a form of regulatory capture?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I don't really think anybody knows the answer. I do think we're much better at law and regulation when we're responding to developments instead of trying to anticipate developments. But I know there's certainly a large group of people smart people, experienced people, who think we can't afford to wait until AI reaches sort of development milestones to try to regulate it because it might be too late. I don't know what the right answer is. I wish I did. I could probably make a good living off of it if I knew the right answer. But I don't know the right answer, and I don't know exactly the level of regulation. I know there was a feeling in the tech industry that the Biden administration had gone too far or was leaning too far that way. I've heard read some interesting things from Mark Andreessen, for example, on that, the discomfort they had with the Biden administration's trend toward heavy regulation in AI, thinking that would stymie development. the Europeans, they are frankly regulation happy. So they do like to regulate in the European Union. We sometimes sort of tongue in cheek call them a regulatory superpower. That is sort of what they do the best. And they are good at regulating. I just think it is very difficult to anticipate where a system will go before it's gotten there and figure out how we need to regulate it before we see what it can actually do. So the important part, I would say, probably unhelpfully, is that some regulation is good, I think, in the area, but the regulation needs to be carefully calculated to still allow pretty aggressive development of this new area to make sure that we don't fall behind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I understand the challenge you're talking about, right? Because we're in the early days. We know this is a powerful tool, and perhaps there is a necessity for regulation, but because it hasn't fully matured, we don't know what that is. And regulations are very sticky. Once you create one, they tend to stay around forever and not ever be cleansed or go away. So if you hit this wrong and you're a little bit too aggressive on it, all you achieve in the end might just be that you prevent US AI technology from developing to its full potential, and maybe you allow our adversaries a more favorable playing field to develop their AI technology. So, yeah, it kind of reminds me almost a little bit of the foreign policy issues around CO2 regulation, right? The Western world is obviously generally pro regulating the emissions of CO2s, and this has created the problem of like, hey, we're all sharing one atmosphere with the rest of the world. Are we actually doing anything if we stop our own CO2 emissions? But we don't care what gets emitted overseas in China and India.
No, it's exactly right. I think so many technology areas are like this, and we've had this very similar conversation with regard to lethal autonomous weapon systems, where we have. But it's great for the United States and the West to put limits or restrictions on the use of autonomous weapon systems. But if our adversaries aren't looking at the same restrictions, we do just fall behind in development.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough issue. And one of the other legal issues that AI is kind of contending with right now is the fact that the training data that it's used to create things, a lot of it is copyrighted, right? And these models are very, very data hungry. And part of the magic of their performance is that they consume so much information, they just become a huge depth of knowledge. So, with your legal hat on, right, what are the big issues around using copyrighted training data in AI models?
Yeah, it's a fascinating area for lawyers. And there are obviously lawyers that specialize in copyright that know a lot more about it than I do. I think right now, there seems to be a sympathy in the courts for protecting copyright information from use in these models. I'm not sure how long that will stand up, and I just as a practical matter, I'm not sure we even want it to, or that there's a good reason for it to stand up. And at the risk of offending everybody who's a creator. I do a little bit of writing myself, but I don't make a living off of my writing. I'd have to say, this is sort of the way we do business in life. We take in, as humans, we look at information, we read information, we observe the world around us, we look at art, we listen to music, we take that all in, and then we sort of spit it out or regurgitate it in another form, hopefully in another form. It's not quite exactly the same as what we took in, but we learn and we process and we put things together in different ways. And I don't think that's really different from what AI is doing. It's just doing it more efficiently and on a larger scale. And it's not a human being, it's a machine, but
it's an artificial brain.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our human brains, right? We read copyrighted material and we watch copyrighted movies, and somehow this material is influencing our decision making or influencing our creativity, or we're drawing ideas from it or whatever. I mean, that's the whole point of it, right? And that has some very difficult to find effect on everything else we do. And the problem is that, how then do you make the argument that AI, simply because it's artificial, isn't allowed to do the same thing if it's not directly duplicating copyrighted information?
No, I think it's exactly right. And it's an age-old argument. It's biblical. There's nothing new under the sun, and we are really just putting things together in different ways. And I actually read a kind of a funny quote from Elvis Costello back in the day during one of the cases against a musician who supposedly had stolen a riff from one of his songs, and he said, I don't remember. He's a better quote than I am, but it was to the effect of, "This is what we all do. We take things and we break them apart and we put them back together in magical ways." That this is just the nature of the business.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why we have genres of music, or each artist isn't independently creating things. And, so many of them happen to come up with things that sound like rock and roll at exactly the same time, right? They're all participating deliberately in a certain genre, and they're just trying to create some new version of it.
Exactly.
It's very rare for an artist to create an entirely new genre. And when they do, they're celebrated for it, right?
Precisely. Yeah.
But most of them are borrowing from the ideas of others, and AI is doing the same thing. Now, I mean, this is a huge gray area because I can understand like how concerned I would be as an artist if something that is so much like the work that I'm producing is being produced for free in AI that it now suddenly negates the demand for my own product, right? Then I'm feeling real harm from it.
And we're seeing that. I mean, a lot of small businesses already are feeling like they can't compete anymore with AI. If they make a small number of pieces of works of art or whatever. But I do think, and Nick Bostrom talks about this some in his new book, much like we do now, but maybe to a greater extent, in the future, maybe we'll just value things incredibly highly because they're made by humans. And so then be willing to pay a lot more for them. So maybe you wouldn't have to compete directly with AI, because it's also true that, look around in a hotel room or whatever, we've had manufactured art on the walls in hotel rooms forever, and it's not very valuable.
Yeah.
But that theoretically computes with artists. But wouldn't it be nicer if they had all hand painted paintings, and I suppose very upscale hotels that I've never been able to afford to stay in might, as about it. Exactly. Might be able to have those. But, people might pay more for handcrafted items as they do now, but even on a larger scale.
Yeah, I guess it kind of makes me think of like maybe with the invention of photography, right? And I'm sure there was a lot of fear around the time that this was going to put a lot of artists out of business. But like you said, it just created kind of a niche market, particularly for art. We've had, photos for over 100 years now, and yet we still commission artists to do something because it's novel and it's creative and it's cool, right? To have an artist's interpretation of your family portrait rather than just have one taken.
That's right. And I think in the past, during the early development stages of different technologies, we've tried to carve out a niche to preserve the old technology. But honestly, I think that's, to me, is just a transition period. We had the same thing that happened when we went to the automobile. The people in the horse business weren't too happy about it. And so we tried to think of ways to keep them in the business. And there was, we had the Luddites, of course, the movement in the UK that was against automated manufacture. And, those things, there's a transition period where people are finding other things to do, or the next generation comes along. It can be a very difficult transition period, but eventually we're through it and everybody's found something else to do. So far, we've always found some other way to stay gainfully employed as humans.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you, right? I don't buy into the kind of doomer perspective of AI is going to take everybody's jobs and it's going to be this apocalypse. Whoever controls the models is going to control the value in the world. And we're all just, it's going to be serfs versus kings. I agree that we've had huge tools of leverage that become available in the past, and there've been concerns about it displacing people and, the creative destruction of capitalism. Really, it's just always upgraded people. But, I think people that would argue against that idea would say that, all of this is coming when we achieve artificial general intelligence, like a true human being replacement in a computer. And my question is, what is artificial general intelligence? If I talk to ChatGPT, it seems pretty intelligent, right? Like, where is that line exactly drawn? How do we know when we get there?
Yeah, it's really difficult and to figure out where it is. And, some people, they've said for ages, artificial general intelligence is always 5 years away, and it will always be.
It's like fusion.
Right. Exactly. It's just down the road, just over the horizon. But I don't know. I guess we'll eventually create some model that at least is incredibly close to what we'd consider to be an intelligent human being, really. And at that point, I think question number one to answer is, do they get civil rights? Are they imbued with certain rights? Because if they're really an artificial general intelligence that can think like a human, what prevents them from actually being a human? And this is a discussion we don't have a whole lot in the area. But if they're going to have quote unquote human rights, or sort of an intelligent being rights, then we have to look at them in an entirely different way. But if it's still just going to be a machine, I'm not sure it's all that difficult to deal with. If we're going to say this is just a really, really good machine that can think really closely to a human, or maybe just like a human, so what?
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that there really isn't a clearly defined line to know when we've achieved artificial general intelligence. We just expect this technology to continue to become more and more human-like, and its ability to reason just becomes more and more obvious. And at some point, we may just declare, okay, we've achieved it.
Right. And I think, like you said, Eric, there are, if the definition were they have to be able to create something that's incredibly unique, that has never been seen before in the world, then maybe there've only been, a couple of dozen real humans in the world in our entire history, because most of us just reproduce and mix things in different ways. So none of us are as we were talking about, none of us are entirely unique and creative, or very few of us are.
Yeah. And the people that are, they're widely celebrated.
Yeah.
So if that's the criteria for artificial general intelligence, then most of the human population doesn't have general intelligence.
Right. And it's already, if we're looking at markers that look like IQ or things like that, it's already I think as smart as or smarter than humans. So if that's what we're looking for, this kind of performative measures, then it's already there. I don't think that's quite it. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to change gears a little bit and get into cybersecurity. So my first question is there currently a cyber war going on with China? You see a lot about it in the news with, Chinese cyber attack, stealing information, right? Feels like they've achieved some victories, perhaps, right? They stole the plans for the F-22 and the F-35, and it heavily influenced the development of their own Air Force. So is there a cyber war going on? And if so, keeping score, who's winning?
Yeah. I try not to say things just to be headliney, but I think we are in the middle of a cyber war with China, and I think we have been for a while. I think this is what cyber war looks like. It doesn't look like kinetic war. It looks like this long, drawn out competition, or what in our doctrine we call persistent engagement in cyberspace. It's constant, frequent engagements, like daily or hourly engagements, where we contest for control of systems or presence on systems to increase our capacity to collect intelligence, collect information, to affect the outcome of decisions, whatever it is that we're vying for. But I think this is what it looks like. I can't come up with a better definition of what cyber war would look like that doesn't just look like cyber enabled kinetic warfare. Of course, we use cyber capabilities when we fight kinetic wars, for targeting, and all our systems are dependent on cyber to some extent now. But short of it being an actual kinetic war, I think this is it. This is as hot as a cyber war gets.
It's interesting. So, from my perspective, right, this is not something I pay particular attention to. I'll see the headlines though, right? It feels very much one-sided. I think that's, there could be a reporting bias only because Chinese victories, when they steal a bunch of data from the US, or when they, copy a key piece of military technology or something, those generate a lot of headlines. But for this to be a war, there needs to be an offensive and a defensive. So is there an offensive effort going into China, and why don't we hear about those victories as much?
Yeah, I think the United States is definitely very skilled in this area. And I think the reason we don't hear about it is that we're certainly not inclined to talk about our successes. There's no need. And it also could denigrate or limit our success, because for example, if our success were gaining access to an incredibly sensitive communication system so that we could collect intelligence, for example, if we said it, we'd lose our access. So we're not going to announce it. And it's also true that in the People's Republic of China, there isn't there's no honest broker like we have in the press, or even the opposition party, who might be looking for things to talk about, or at least publicize. I mean, they're not going to disclose, I don't think, but the opposition party, but the press certainly would. They'd search things out and investigate things and disclose if there are breaches. So there's no way to keep it a secret if we're the victims. But if we're the perpetrators, I think both sides in that case are looking to keep it quiet.
Makes a lot of sense. You don't want to give away your strategic advantage. Okay. But I mean, there are examples of offensive cyber successes that the U.S. has taken on. So I think the Snowden leaks kind of confirmed that one of our big successes, you were talking about it earlier, I forget the name of it, the program that caused the Iranian centrifuges to spin out of control.
Yeah, the United States has never taken credit for Stuxnet, but it's been widely reported that the United States and Israel carried it out.
Interesting. I thought that the Snowden leaks verified it, but they still won't take credit?
No.
Interesting. You want to talk about Snowden? I heard an interesting perspective from you.
Yeah,
I don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I'll talk about
it. I love the fact that, I meet new people who come from kind of different worlds and they have a new perspective on things that I'd never heard before. So, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but I think it is very unique, right? I think in the non-governmental world, Snowden is seen as a hero. He's seen as someone who blew the whistle on an overreaching NSA program that was, maybe it was targeting people who deserve to be targeted, but it was also sweeping a lot of collateral people that didn't deserve to be targeted into a surveillance program. I've heard this opinion from you. I've since heard it from other govies and people that I talked to in Washington, that the Snowden leaks were actually a tragedy for U.S. security. Do you mind unpacking that a little bit?
No, not at all. I do think certainly there was this big rehabilitation effort for Snowden that was facilitated by a large media push and the news media. It was sort of just that time and place, and in kind of 2014 there was this growth of concern about privacy, which side note is pretty ironic, since especially the young generation gives up all their data to any system that they log into, but so essentially everybody is allowed to have their data except for the U.S. government. But that's okay. That's the system we work with. But yeah, I think part of the problem was there's been very little by people who just had this gut reaction, hey, he's a whistleblower and he must be a hero. They haven't really spent the time to dig into the information that he disclosed, because is there anybody really upset that the United States had an incredibly effective way of collecting intelligence from the People's Republic of China or from Russia? I mean, how would that not be what the intelligence community's job is? So there were, I think it's a Business Insider article that talked about something like 110 things that were disclosed by Snowden. Maybe 5 of them were actually impacting on the privacy of Americans. The rest of them, there were a number of them that were just disclosing techniques, which, I don't know why that would be good for the U.S. to disclose techniques. And the rest of them were just really effective intelligence operations where NSA was doing exactly what it's chartered to do in a very effective manner that it can no longer do as effectively for some years after the Snowden disclosures.
Interesting.
I can't speak to whether or not why he felt like he didn't have a hearing inside the system. I was inside the intelligence community when I was at Cyber Command. I felt like we had a system where you could report things, and there would have been ways, even if he felt like he needed to be a whistleblower, not to disclose the things that weren't violating any rights in his mind.
Okay, so I think it comes down to his intention, which is under question, right? So if it's true that all he wanted to do was blow the whistle on NSA surveillance overreach of American citizens, of the 110 things that were released, he needed to release 5. And what actually happened from it was you get the 110, and 105 of them are related to critical national security efforts that are actually keeping Americans safe and are not involving surveillance of American citizens. So why didn't you just release the 5?
Right.
And we'll perhaps never know the answer to that. It could have just been that he was grabbing as much information as he could. He was acting in what he believed was the best interest. And there was a lot of bycatch in that process. Or, perhaps he was a malicious actor, as he's been accused to be. We'll may never know the answer.
No, I don't.
I mean, he ended up in Russia. The story is that he got stuck in Russia after his passport was taken. But, he ended up right in the homeland of America's greatest adversary with all of this intelligence.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
There's reason for suspicion.
Yeah, and he was clearly instrumentalized. I mean, even if he hadn't intended to release, I suspected he released more that we don't know about. Because everything he had that he may have tried to keep secret, I suspect the Russians have it all now.
Okay, changing gears again. So we're still talking about cybersecurity. I wanted to ask you about quantum computing. Been a big, number of big breakthroughs there. Does quantum computing pose a threat to cybersecurity? Is this near term, long term, or something that can be averted?
Yeah, I do think it's a threat. I mean, I'm not a technology expert, but my friends who are tell me that quantum computing has the capability to really disrupt our encryption systems, which, you know, to me, as somebody who's worked in national defense, I first think encryption. Okay, we can't do classified discussions, or we can't keep our classified information safe. But really, it's much bigger than that, because failure of encryption could cause the failure of cryptocurrencies, for example, or even standard financial transactions in the world, because we do use encryption, obviously, to encrypt our ordinary everyday financial transactions with credit cards, etc. And if we can't properly encrypt them, if they can be decrypted by criminals, then the system would fail. So we'll have to come up with another way to do it. I know there's a race on now to come up with sort of quantum proof encryption. And I know the U.S. is on the leading edge of that. China's made a lot of progress as well, I understand. But quantum we've been promised quantum for a while. And, it does exist, but its practical implementation and systems, I think we're still a ways off.
Okay. Yeah. So I've also heard about the development of quantum resistant encryption, right? And I think, that's very promising. And obviously, if that progresses faster than quantum development, then you would think the problem is solved. But I think there's another issue, and that is that a lot of information that is encrypted has been intercepted and is being stored by adversaries or people with malicious intentions, right? Just on the hope that someday I'll be able to break these algorithms. And those algorithms are encrypted with, traditional encryption that is not quantum resistant.
That's right.
So there could be, thousands of terabytes of intercepted communications that are encrypted that suddenly just become unlocked in public.
Yeah, I think that's for sure the case. I also think, though, the longer we can kick the can on that, the less relevant that information becomes.
That's a good point. Gary, really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add before we close?
No, it's been great.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate it.